first day of fall, September 21st, 2020. Nice first fall day in Boonville, Missouri. We're 55 degrees, it's sunny, it's nice outside. And we've been talking, and I missed Friday because I had to teach. And then kept doing consults on Friday afternoon, so I didn't get to the second part of the series we're doing on fructose and ketogenic diet, so that'd be number 3. So ketogenic lifestyle is what we're talking about. So today, the title is Fructose is Alcohol Without the Buds. And biochemistry wise, I'm going to prove that to you and show you that fructose is a toxin just like alcohol. So we talked about fructose in the diet and the high fructose corn syrup, I think on Wednesday. We talked about the changes that have led to an overabundance of the metabolic syndrome, which involves insulin resistance. That's been going on for at least 30 years, probably 40 years, because of the recommendation that we switch to a high carbohydrate and low fat diet. So most of the processed foods, if you look at boxes and etc., have high fructose corn syrup in them. So we're going to talk about how the metabolism of fructose and alcohol is the exact same, pretty much. So fructose is not glucose. Glucose is the energy of life. It's what your brain runs on. And you get natural sugar. Good morning, Wendy. You get natural sugar from fruits and vegetables, complex carbohydrates. So fructose, which was introduced by Japan in 1975, so there was no such thing as fructose in food prior to developed in the early 1970s, put on the market in 1975. So that was, 45 years ago. So that's why I say there's been this huge increase in metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, and type 2 diabetes, probably from fructose processing of foods, high fructose corn syrup. So why is it a problem? Well, fructose, unlike glucose, does not suppress your hunger hormones. Okay, so if you're in my human physiology class during the gastrointestinal system part of that course, we talk about all the GI hormones, the gut-brain axis, etc. So there's a hunger hormone called ghrelin that is not suppressed by fructose. And of course, I took a bunch of notes on this, so I have to keep looking down, try to keep looking at you as much as I can. So ghrelin is a hunger suppressive hormone, and it's not suppressed by fructose, so you continue to eat. If you don't have a hunger hormone suppression, you don't know that you're full, and it takes about 20 minutes. If you're eating meals less than 20 minutes, you're actually eating too much before your brain can get the signal that you're full. There's also a hormone called leptin that comes from fat cells. Good morning, Linda and Christy. So fat cell leptin basically tells your brain that you're full as well. And so there was an internal medicine friend of mine in Springfield, Missouri, 20-some years ago, who was a diabetic. And he really felt that leptin was going to be like the drug or hormone of getting rid of type 2 diabetes, because type 2 diabetes is reversible, it is curable, and he thought leptin would do that. He invested a lot of money in a company that was working on leptin. For some reason, it never really hit the market and did well, but leptin basically, if you dose it correctly, will tell your brain what you should weigh. So if you want to weigh, if you're a female and you want to weigh 135 pounds, you dose your leptin accordingly, and you just weigh 135 pounds. And for men, let's say 170, 180, 190, depending on what their percent body fat distribution is. So leptin would be great. Fructose doesn't suppress leptin either, so you can get 2 hits before you, if you're eating, 2 hits before you ever metabolize what you've eaten. So fructose promotes the metabolic syndrome, and we talked about that last Wednesday. The metabolic syndrome is also known as prediabetes. It's the first sign of insulin resistance, and if it's not corrected, then a person will become a type 2 diabetic with all the horrors that go with that, and meds and insulin and shots and checking blood sugars 3 or 4 times a day. All right, so let's compare. If you consume 120 calories of glucose, so that's the energy of life, we'll follow it through the liver, especially since everything you put in your mouth goes through your liver. So in the liver, if you eat 120 calories of glucose, presented to your liver is 24 of those calories. Okay, here's the biochemistry. It's on the picture, the graphic that I put up an hour or so ago about this. So I'm going to try and lead you through it without driving you insane, like I do my students, because this involves the Krebs Cycle. I don't make them memorize it, but I did. I had to memorize it in medical school. So in the liver, you got 24 calories of glucose presented to your liver, and that is converted to glucose 6-phosphate. So glucose 6-phosphate, so a phosphate group to the 6th carbon sugar, glucose, cannot leave the liver. So glucose can leave the liver, glucose 6-phosphate cannot. Okay? It can leave under the influence of glucagon. So if your blood sugar is low, glucagon can get glucose 6-phosphate converted to glucose and into your blood. Epinephrine can do the same thing, so the fight or flight response, steroid hormone epinephrine. So glucose 6-phosphate can be stored as glycogen. That's the storage form of glucose. And the glycogen storage in the liver is unlimited. You can store as much glycogen as you want in your liver and you're not going to hurt yourself. So there's no liver damage from that. If it's metabolized, glucose, instead of stored, it's converted to pyruvate. And there's pyruvate is kind of like the I'm going to say the axle of a wheel of a bunch of reactions. Okay, so pyruvate can be converted to ketones. So when you're on ketogenic diet, you convert that to ketones and your brain runs on ketones. I told you that the minimal amount of carbohydrate that's needed to sustain life is 0. You don't need any carbohydrate to sustain life. So if pyruvate goes through the Krebs cycle, or what's known as the citric acid cycle, the Krebs cycle goes around and around and around. It produces citrate. That's why it's called the citric acid cycle, as well as CO2. And of course, you breathe off CO2 when you exhale, right? The citrate is metabolized by 3 enzymes, which we won't go through, and is turned into very low density lipoprotein, which then turns into triglycerides. Some of it's metabolized to free fatty acids. And free fatty acids can cause metabolic syndrome. So really, glucose is turned into fat, or can be stored in fat, okay, and then metabolized through the citric acid cycle, which then leads to so very low density lipoproteins lead to triglycerides and high density and LDL and HDL for the taxis of cholesterol. Okay, so glucose can actually be turned into very low density lipoproteins. So you get glucose that can create new fat if you're not using it for energy. Okay? All right, so let's look at ethanol and then we'll look at fructose, so alcohol. So ethanol, alcohol, is a carbohydrate. I'm going to prove it to you. So it can be toxic to the liver. Everybody knows that. I had a friend of mine die of liver toxicity from alcoholism about a year ago. I've taught, I was an addiction medicine person. I talked to a lot of people that dealt with alcohol and opiates and methamphetamine, etc. And one of the things we always checked on all of them, especially alcohol, people that use too much alcohol, is liver function tests. Okay, so acute ethanol is metabolized in the brain. That's why you get the buzz from alcohol. Okay, and once we get done with this, I'm going to prove to you that fructose and alcohol go through the liver in the same way. However, fructose is not metabolized in the brain, so it's not regulated by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. But it is the exact same mechanism, and it's almost the exact same thing. You just just don't get behavioral changes with fructose, depending on who you talk to. But you don't get the buzz from fructose that you get from alcohol, because alcohol can be metabolized in the brain. So let's present or drink 120 calories of 80% alcohol. So, a pretty decent martini or two. And from that, 96 calories of ethyl alcohol will be presented to the liver compared to 24 calories of glucose. Okay? So alcohol is converted to acetaldehyde, which is a relative of formaldehyde, which is used to preserve, in the lab, used to like eyeballs and hearts and all that for dissection purposes. And an anatomy lab smells like formaldehyde. They've changed that, so you don't need formaldehyde. But alcohol is converted to acetaldehyde, which is related, so it's an aldehyde. Okay, that cross-links proteins and creates reactive oxygen species. Aldehydes do. And reactive oxygen species lead to chronic inflammation if you're not clearing them, and that's what leads to a lot of chronic disease and illness. Okay, so acetate from alcohol is generated from acetaldehyde, and then that's sent into the citric acid or the Krebs cycle to metabolize 4 times the amount of calories than you get from glucose. So citrate is then converted by those 3 enzymes to very low density lipoproteins, 4 times the amount that you get from glucose, the natural sugar, the energy of life. Okay, so 4 times more VLDL with alcohol than fruit. Okay, so now table sugar, sucrose. So let's eat 120 calories of sucrose, which represents 60 calories of fructose. So remember, table sugar has fructose. Okay, so only the liver can metabolize fructose, not the brain. Told you that with alcohol. So basically, you have 72 calories of fructose that enter the liver, and fructose does not stimulate insulin release, so you can't lower your blood sugar by eating fructose. Okay, so fructose doesn't affect the insulin level. So all of that fructose is taken into the liver. Okay, so you're eating 120 calories of table sugar. Half of that is taken, 72 calories of that is taken into the liver. Okay. So since it's and then some of that is metabolized to uric acid. Uric acid is what causes gout. It's a waste product that you urinate out. And people that get gout get uric acid crystals, usually in their big toe. My dad had that problem, and that's painful. Okay. And then uric acid blocks nitric oxide production. We did a whole class on nitric oxide, which is generated by the cells lining your blood vessels to dilate them and reduce blood pressure. So alcohol consumption and fructose consumption can increase uric acid levels, decrease nitric oxide, and lead to high blood pressure. Okay. Allopurinol is the medication given to reduce uric acid levels, especially people with gout, and that does lower blood pressure. So they did there's a study they did in teenagers that had obesity, insulin resistance, and hypertension. Okay, and that's basically the high fructose corn syrup and the hypertension epidemic in the United States. So basically contributed to by sugar and high fructose corn syrup. Okay, so sports drinks, they're really promoted to teenagers. They're supposed to be for athletes. May help athletes, okay, but they contain fructose and give some energy boost right before athletic endeavors. So you get, but you're taking in sugar and using it because you're getting ready to have a lot of metabolism, a lot of lot of energy expenditure. Okay, but who consumes the most sports drinks in the U.S.? Teenagers. They're not technically promoted to teenagers, but teenagers think they're cool. So think of, Monsters and all the high fructose corn syrup sports drinks that are consumed. Okay, so in the liver, fructose is so alcohol to acetaldehyde. Fructose is converted to glyceraldehyde, and then metabolized the pyruvate into the Krebs cycle, where citrate is then converted by those three enzymes into very low density lipoprotein as well as fatty acids. Okay, so this is fascinating. In medical students, they did a 6-day study of a high fructose corn syrup diet. So these were medical students. What happened was, in 6 days, just 6 days, these students' triglyceride levels doubled because they had 4 times the amount of very low density lipoprotein being produced. Lipogenesis, which is creation of new fat, went up by a factor of 5. So they had 5 times more new fat being created just from 6 days of a high fructose corn syrup diet. Okay. Free fatty acids increased, leading to metabolic, which can lead to metabolic syndrome. So those doubled. So really, everybody, good morning, I think. Even the people saying, well, you should intake a low-fat diet and raise your carbohydrates. Well, fructose is a carbohydrate, right? But it's also a high-fat diet. It's creating 4 times the amount of very low-density lipoprotein and free fatty acids than a low-carbohydrate, high natural fat diet. Okay, so carbohydrates that are processed are really a high-fat diet, and that's the biochemistry behind that. Okay, so there are actually lipid droplets on high fructose corn syrup diets that are formed in the liver. So lipid droplets, there's fat droplets in your liver from that. They're trapped. That leads to fatty liver disease. And you've heard of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So there can be cirrhosis, alcoholic fatty liver disease, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. You get the same thing either with alcohol or fructose. Okay, so insulin becomes ineffective in the liver under that situation, and so your insulin resistance sets in from that little cycle. And once you're insulin resistant and you don't reverse that, you wind up potentially becoming a type 2 diabetic. Okay, so since they do the same thing in the liver, then chronic fructose and chronic alcohol ingestion share the following problems. 1, hypertension. 2, myocardial infarction or heart attack. 3, dyslipidemia because of the very low density lipoprotein formation. Pancreatitis. I forgot to keep numbering. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Obesity. 6, liver dysfunction and potential fatty liver disease. 7, insulin resistance. 8, type 2 diabetes. And 9, addiction. So you can be addicted to alcohol, and you can be addicted to table sugar and fructose. It's probably the biggest addiction in the country is sugar and fructose. You just don't, it's just not regulated the way alcohol and other addictions are, but it is just as, if not more addictive than all the other things substances that you can think that can be addictive. Well, how do you make alcohol? Well, when I was a chemistry student at St. Louis University, one of the chemists from Anheuser-Busch came over and gave us a lecture after hours on how you make Budweiser. And you make alcohol by fermenting sugar. So the point of that is, and it was fascinating talk, a lot of chemistry behind just Budweiser. But basically the point is that sugar and alcohol are the exact same thing in every way. Okay? So let's talk about obesity. So if you're trying to get into the ketogenic lifestyle and reduce your carbohydrates and sugar, and now you know the biochemistry behind how that works, So you're shifting from creating creating new fat and very low density lipoprotein to the Krebs cycle. You're taking your pyruvate and turning it into ketones on which your brain can run. So 80% of your brain can run on ketones. The other 20% that requires glucose can be made de novo inside of your body. I proved to you that last Wednesday. So is exercise important? Yes, but not because you're reducing caloric intake. So exercise does not, well, not because you're burning more calories, let's put it that way. Because everybody knows that eat less and exercise more for weight loss doesn't work. Everybody that's tried it knows it doesn't work. I've done it. Every patient client I've talked to, that's the yo-yo effect. They bounce right back. It has nothing to do with burning calories. What it does, exercise, if you're working on losing weight, it improves skeletal muscle insulin sensitivity. Okay? So insulin resistance is a large part of obesity, although a lot of people with metabolic syndrome aren't heavy. They can have normal body weight and still have insulin resistance. Exercise also reduces stress and therefore cortisol. Okay? So that's part of the equation. And the other thing is exercise makes that Krebs cycle, the citric acid cycle, run faster so that citric acid is cleared before it can be metabolized by 3 enzymes into very low density lipoproteins and made into fat and fatty acids. Okay? So what about fiber? You always hear that, increase your fiber. So 100 to 300 milligrams of fiber 50,000 years ago, now we're at 12 grams a day. So 100 to 300 grams of fiber a day down to 12 typically in the US. So, so fructose in nature, so natural foods, are always accompanied by high fiber. And so think about a sugar cane. Well, sugar cane comes as a stick. Now you can chew on it, but it's high fiber. A sugar cane thing, it comes as a stick that you can chew on. Then it's processed and put into food and all that. So if you're eating carbohydrates of any kind, eat them with fiber. And the most common way to do that is natural fruits and natural vegetables. Okay? So basically, fiber reduces the rate of intestinal absorption of carbohydrates and it decreases insulin response to carbohydrates. It increases the speed of transit of your intestinal contents to the ileum, and there is a feedback mechanism from the ileum to the stomach to the brain that gives you a sense of satiation. I'm full. So the faster you get that ileum response, the better. Okay? That's in my physiology class. We talk about that ileocholic reflex. And then decreased absorption with fiber intake from fatty acids to the colon. So less absorption of fatty acids by the colon, and they are metabolized by bacteria in the colon to suppress insulin release. So we talked about the gut microbiome 2 weeks ago, I think. So the Paleolithic diet, where you eat everything natural that comes out of the ground. So Paleolithic diet is natural foods that come out of the ground, involving no cooking. So you're eating that raw, will reverse type 2 diabetes in about a week. So you're going back to that 100 to 300 grams of fiber a day. And you can reverse diabetes eating that way, paleolithically, in about a week. That's kind of amazing. Okay, so this physician that I'm quoting is Robert Lustig. And this is from a talk that he gave a few years ago. Basically, he did the biochemistry basically like that slide, that graphic I showed you. So I kind of made that a little bit easier to understand, I'm hoping. So he calls this the fructosification of the world. Okay, so if you think about it, fructose on the market in 1975, it's in everything. If you get a box or a can of something, soda, whatever, the only way to avoid it is to eat stuff on the periphery of the grocery store, stuff that grows naturally. Everything else is processed, and almost all of it has high fructose corn syrup. So, if you go to McDonald's, is there things that don't have fructose in them? Yes, he points this out. There's 7 things on the menu at McDonald's that has no fructose. So, number 1 would be French fries. That's all starch, salt, and fat. Okay. Number 2 is hash browns. Number 3, chicken McNuggets. And of course, there's a whole other story about chicken McNuggets. But of course, everybody uses a dipping sauce, which contains high fructose corn syrup. Number 4 is sausage. Number 5, Diet Coke. But that has aspartame. That's the subject of another class. Number 6, coffee. And number 7, iced tea. Even if you sweeten it with Sweet and Low or aspartame. No fructose. Okay? What about Gatorade? Everybody thinks Gatorade's good for you. It came out of the University of Florida, I think. Florida Gators, right? Yeah, that's where it was developed. It's now owned by a huge cola company. And apparently Gatorade that first came out tasted awful, so the company that bought it put high fructose corn syrup in it so they could get past the taste of the Gatorade. And most people that drink Gatorade are not athletes. They're children and teenagers. Although teenagers drink Red Bulls and Monsters and all that, all the different drinks that I can't remember the name of. Okay. All right. So, what about milk? Low-fat milk, white milk, 130 calories. There's 15 grams of lactose. That's a natural sugar. Most children won't drink low-fat milk. It takes about 3 days to get used to 0% fat milk. You get the calories, you get the lactose. If you're lactose intolerant, you can't handle it. But low-fat milk is actually pretty tolerable. If you go back to whole milk, it tastes all greasy and fatty. But a lot of people give their children chocolate milk. Difference: chocolate milk is 190 calories and 29 grams of high fructose corn syrup. Okay, what about infant formula? This will blow your mind. So WIC, women, infant, children. They have an incentive to feed newborns, right? And usually they recommend formula if people won't breastfeed. And so that's led to an epidemic, and this is a few years ago, an epidemic of obesity in 6-month-old babies, formula-fed babies. So what's in formula? 43.2% of formula is corn syrup solids. Okay? 14.6% is soy protein. 20% of us are intolerant to soy, not necessarily allergic. So I'm working on a new protein shake that has no soy in it for body solution systems, because the biggest complaint with soy protein shakes is flatulence and gas pain. That's soy. So infant formula, 14.6% soy protein in there. I went through this with my youngest. We went through every kind of formula you could think of, and he just had GI colic that was horrifying. I finally got rid of it by giving him whole milk. And then my doctor got mad at me because that wasn't enough calories, so I put, I'm trying to think the syrup I put in it. But I put some syrup in there, natural syrup that would increase the calories. But cured the colic immediately. I just put him on cow's milk. 11 point, so it's still formula, 11.5% safflower oil, 10.3% table sugar. So 10.3% of Coca-Cola has 10.5% sucrose in it. 8.4% soy oil, 8.1% coconut oil. So basically, formula, you're feeding your baby a milkshake or a Coke, right? So basically, formula is getting babies addicted to sugar way early. I mean, like almost immediately they're addicted to sugar, and they start craving it. And some of them crave that and continue to eat it until they become obese teenagers as well, and they have high blood pressure, and they have insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. Some of them have type 2 diabetes as teenagers, and they're medicated. Okay, so let's compare a soda can to a can of beer. So a soda has 90 calories per can that goes to the liver. A beer, 92 calories per can that goes to the liver. They have the same metabolite. I showed you the metabolism and the biochemistry of alcohol and high fructose corn syrup or sugar. So basically almost the same thing presented to the liver, but people don't think twice about giving they don't think twice about giving their child a soda pop, and they would be abhorrent to give their child a beer, but it's the exact same thing, the exact same mechanism. Okay, for all intents and purposes, a can of beer and a can of soda are exactly biochemically the same. Okay, so again, in summary, we're right at about 30 minutes. Fructose is a carbohydrate. Ethyl alcohol, ethanol is a carbohydrate. Fructose is metabolized just like a fat, and fructose is a toxin just like alcohol. So we've been poisoned so for 45 years we've been poisoned with fructose. Alcohol's been around for a long, long time. For some reason, the ATF regulates alcohol because it changes behavior, but it doesn't regulate sugar and fructose. Same mechanism, same amount of toxicity, same problem. You just don't metabolize sugar in your brain like you do alcohol. Okay, so that's it for the biochemistry of why fructose is alcohol without the buzz. And there's some biochemistry about weight loss, etc. in there as well. So I'm going to change topics, I think, Wednesday. We'll see. Might have some more stuff to talk to you about on sugar and alcohol. I found another article this morning that was pretty fascinating. So, great fall day. Enjoy the weather. It's wonderful. All weekend was wonderful here. You guys have a great Monday. Peace and health to you all, and I will see you Wednesday morning at 9:30, unless I get called to the high school. Okay, see you all later. Bye.